give it a second. I'm going to let Facebook tell me that it's live. So once Facebook tells me that I'm live, I guess we'll get started. As you all know, I haven't done lives in quite a minute, but for good reason. Busy man. But today there will be. As a matter of fact, let me tag Brother Quentin. Let me see. Quentin, this one's for you. So, this is a Negro News Network special edition broadcast. There is a pseudo-intellectual on the loose, and I plan on exposing the pseudo-intellectual for the pseudo-intellectual that he is. Now, I was originally going to pre-record this video and then post it. What's up, Stevie? What's going on, big cousin? I was originally going to pre-record this video and then post it, that way I could do all kind of funny editing and effects, stuff like that, but we won't do it. Nonetheless, I threw together some material in response to the individual, Mr. Elisha Taylor, that I tagged there that you'll see, and mostly this video is going to be a challenge to him and actually a response to some of the goofy nonsense that he posts. So, without further ado, there you go, let's see. Let's see, let's do it. Now, why am I here today? Well, Mr. Elisha Taylor, here are the facts of the case as we were presented. Mr. Elisha Taylor hosts this regular program, and as you can see, bam, right over there, you can see the flyer for his live broadcast stuff that he does. He even asked for donations and cash apps, stuff like that, like during these really weird broadcasts where he pretends to be an intellectual. If you watch these things, Mr. Taylor really thinks that he is going to tell you something deep, something that you have like, oh my God, like I have the final challenge. So as I say in point one, and then over in point two, he pretends to have been a learned pastor that was enlightened, and then he somehow came to turn away from Christianity. So on the 1st of August, just 2 days ago, Mr. Taylor shared this ridiculous post, which is the one to the far right over there, depending on how you're looking at your screen. And it's a post supposedly from Mr. Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman is a biblical textual critical scholar, New Testament historian, so on and so forth. And this post, along with many other posts that are on Mr. Taylor's page, is incredibly stupid. So let me read it to you for those of you who have a cheap phone that's too small. It says, what did the Bible originally say? That's the question. It's not in quotations. Greetings, Brother Julius. And it says, it is one thing to say that the originals were inspired, but the reality is that we don't have the originals. So saying they were inspired doesn't help me much unless I can reconstruct the originals. And then there's an end quote. Then another quote starts up again and says, not only do we not have the originals, we do not have the first copies of the originals. We don't even have copies of the copies of the originals, copies of the copies of the copies of the originals. What we have are copies made much later. In most instances, they're copies made many centuries later, and these copies all differ from one another in many thousands of places. Bart Ehrman. That's the quotation. And so let's continue. So what's the problem that Dre has with the post? Okay, so one of these two things we're going to point out, and I cannot wait for Mr. Taylor to respond to. Mr. Taylor, I hope you're watching, and I hope that you watch this and that you respond. Confusion of the differences between transmission and inspiration. It's going to become important later. And then two, the second thing is the scholar quoted disagrees with the conclusion. Now, so, as I point out, the question at the top where it says, what did the Bible originally say? That's the question at the top of the pick is about whether we know what the Bible originally said. That is, we have a question about whether the text has been transmitted properly. But the body of the meme is about Bart Ehrman's disbelief in inspiration, and those are different. And so, as I point out, you're erroneously led to think that we don't know the original content of the Bible, even though Ehrman is commenting specifically on the New Testament, though his argument is about inspiration. If you just read the words, Bart Ehrman is talking principally about inspiration, not transmission, and not whether we know the original words of the text. But Mr. Taylor, who was not a scholar, but who is a security guard, shared this meme, and then he shares this, and then he's the pastor, right? He's the learned pastor who's going to set you straight for what your, incorrect belief is. So here's one of the main things, one of the main takeaways. Transmission of the text, and of any text, is not the same as inspiration. And to give you an easy example of that, if you wrote down, if all you did is you found a note, a book, anything, or some student's homework, but you didn't know who wrote it, and all you did was copy it, that's a separate subject from trying to figure out who actually did the homework, who completed the homework. Those are separate categories. And this is what transmission is versus inspiration. Inspiration has to do with who authored the text. As I say in point one, who authored the text? Was it God, man, both, some other option? That's what inspiration is about. Canonization. These are four distinct categories related to the Bible. Canonization, the process of recognizing which books are scripture. Very important topic, but it is still not the same as transmission. Transmission is the process of copying various texts and its accuracy. And then there's translation, which is how we get stuff from Greek and Hebrew and the 2 or 3 parts that are in Aramaic into English. Separate subjects that Mr. Taylor, the security guard, does not know. So as I state, for those of us that have had to do biblical studies, it doesn't really matter what your particular religion is, because as Bart Ehrman would tell you, Bart Ehrman is not someone who's a Christian, you know that the meme is stupid. Here's what actual textual critics have to say about the issues of transmission and whether we know what the Bible originally said. So this here is, and this gentleman here in the center is Dr. Bruce Metzger. Dr. Bruce Metzger is the author of several books on the New Testament, biblical criticism, biblical history, so on and so forth. This is his book. You'll see his book pictured right there on your left-hand side, and the picture is a picture of Dr. Bruce Metzger with a picture of page 281. The relevant portion reads this, and this is also relevant because this is Dr. Bart Ehrman's predecessor and his teacher. Bart Ehrman co-authored several books with Dr. Bruce Metzger, including commentaries on the Greek New Testament, so on and so forth. And I quote, comes from page 281, this book here. It should be mentioned that, though there are thousands of divergences of wording among the manuscripts of the Bible, more in the New Testament than in the Old, the overwhelming majority of such variant readings involve inconsequential details, such as alternative spellings, order of words, and interchange of synonyms. In these cases, as well as in the relatively few instances involving the substance of records, scholars apply the techniques of textual criticism in order to determine with more or less probability what the original wording was. In any event, no doctrine of the Christian faith depends solely upon a passage that is textually uncertain. So what does that mean? That means that we do not actually face a question. We don't largely face a question of, not knowing what the Bible originally said. That is not the question. But you're going to see that it doesn't matter what your particular religious persuasion is. This is something that is like an internet lie that's circulated by pseudo-intellectuals who simply have access to the internet and Google, pass themselves off as former pastors, and then spread this nonsense far and wide. But let's continue. But let's take, for example, let's say y'all don't really care what Dr. Bruce Metzger says. Dr. Ehrman clearly says that we don't know what it says. But that's not what Dr. Bart Ehrman was speaking of. Now, here is another book that I have by Dr. Bart Ehrman, and you'll see it. I posted a picture of it there. That's my little thumb that's in the bottom left-hand corner of that picture there. Bart Ehrman's book, The New Testament, a Historical Introduction to the Early Christian Writings, 2nd edition. Right there in chapter 29 is the last chapter of the book. The question is, do we have the original New Testament? And after Bart Ehrman goes on, well, matter of fact, let me just read. It says, it is not simply a matter of scholarly speculation to say that the words of the New Testament were changed in the process of copying. We know, they were changed because we can compare all 5,400 copies with one another. What is striking is that when we do, we find that no two of these copies, except the smallest fragments, agree in all of their wording. There can be only one reason for this. The scribes who copied the text changed them. Nobody knows for certain how often they changed them, because no one, misspelled, has yet been able to count all the differences among the surviving manuscripts. Some estimates put the number at around 200,000, others at around 300,000. And then he continues, in spite of these remarkable differences, scholars are convinced that we can reconstruct the original words of the New Testament with reasonable, though not 100% accuracy. So what does Dr. Bart Ehrman actually say about whether or not we have the words of the New Testament? Well, we know with reasonable accuracy what the exact words of the New Testament are. But maybe you still have some doubts. Let's let Dr. Bart Ehrman speak for himself.
How would you contrast what you think the Bible's original message might be, the text of the New Testament, with what Christians commonly accept that message to be?
Well, I don't think that's a matter of textual criticism, because I think textual criticism can get back pretty much to what the authors originally said.
Now, did you guys hear that? That's a 2006 radio interview where Dr. Bart Ehrman was on a Lutheran program, a radio program, and he was asked whether there was some divergence between what Christians have accepted to be true in the words of the New Testament versus what the New Testament actually originally contained. And Bart Ehrman says that's not a textual critical question, because we can get back to what the original New Testament said. Maybe you still need more. So here's another interview. A questioner from the audience asked Dr. Ehrman about the impression that he gives to people about biblical, or the New Testament more accurately, accuracy and transmission. See what he says.
Yes, next.
Dr. Ehrman, as you know, there's probably great stylistic differences between your academic and popular writings. When you're on your misquoting Jesus tour, I think based off the stuff I've heard from and listening especially to you on NPR and whatnot, the impression given was that due to textual variance, you couldn't really know anything that was written in the Bible. But in Forged, you kind of seem to know enough to do stylistic comparisons. And I actually have an MP3 on my iPod where you say to a conservative Lutheran show that we pretty much know what the biblical authors have said. If I use your own methodology towards the Bible against you, wouldn't I conclude there's a fake Bart Ehrman out there that contradicts himself?
Listen. No, it's the real Bart Ehrman who contradicts himself. I don't think I've ever said that we can't know that we have no idea what the biblical authors. Well, it may be the impression, but it's certainly nothing I've ever said, because it's not what I think. I mean, we do have differences in the manuscripts that make it difficult to know what the authors wrote, and that's what misquoting Jesus was about. That we have 5,600 some manuscripts of the New Testament. No two of them are exactly alike. That's a fact. Except for the smallest fragments, and there are hundreds of thousands of differences in these manuscripts. That's a fact. There are more differences in our manuscripts than there are words in the New Testament. It's a fact. So it does create a problem. But most of these differences are completely immaterial. As I say in misquoting Jesus, that most of the differences, most of these hundreds of thousands don't matter for anything. The majority of them simply show that scribes in antiquity could spell no better than my students can today. And scribes didn't have spell check. I mean, these students who hand in papers with misspelled words, you wonder what you can't believe it. I mean, the computer tells you it's misspelled. It puts it in red. I mean, how dumb can you get? But scribes didn't have that, and so they misspelled tons of words. So I think these differences, that some of the differences are really significant. But I don't think that it means that we just throw up our hands and say we have no clue what the Gospel of Mark said. We do have a clue what Mark said. We have manuscript evidence for what Mark said. So if that's the impression that has been given, it's not the impression that I mean. I mean to say that there are significant differences, but that doesn't mean that we just throw up our hands in despair.
Well, let's see. So what should we conclude? Dr. Bart Ehrman does not believe that we do not know the words of the Bible or of the original New Testament writers, despite the fact that goofy Mr. Taylor thinks otherwise. But what about the differences between the manuscripts? And just to go ahead and preempt this question, let's go ahead and deal with it. So before we get to Dr. Dan Wallace, whose quote you see on the left from his book Reinventing Jesus, which I actually have here, this book here, this picture of my book there that's on the screen. But first, well, let's read Dr. Dan Wallace. We cannot consider the quantity of the variants without also looking at their quality. And I'm only reading this because Dr. Bart Ehrman talks about, as he does previously before, 200 to 300,000 variants that exist between the manuscripts. How many of them affect the meaning of the text? How many of them are viable? That is, they are found in manuscripts with a sufficient pedigree that they have some likelihood of reflecting the original wording. Although the quantity of textual variants among the New Testament manuscript numbers in the hundreds of thousands, the quality of these variants as changes in the meaning pales in comparison. Only about 1% of these variants are both meaningful and viable. And, as we will see, they do not affect foundational beliefs. I was supposed to say beliefs, but I put beliefs. So again, there's 4 types of textual variants, right? There are spelling errors, variants that don't affect the translation, meaningful but not viable variants, and meaningful and viable variants. And so let's hear what Dr. Bart Ehrman has to say about this specific issue. Same book as before. Same book. It's another picture. I zoomed in on that specific section. According to Dr. Ehrman, though there are more differences among our manuscripts than there are words in the New Testament, he notes that the vast majority of all changes found in our New Testament manuscripts are careless mistakes that are easily recognized and corrected. Now, so then if you look at that chart that I put down here with Dr. Dan Wallace, you can actually see when the vast majority of the stuff can be easily detected. And you talk about less than 1% of the variants being anything that will be meaningful and viable, and none of those affect translation. Like, for example, Dr. Bart Ehrman thinks that it's important whether we know if Jesus was sad or if he was happy when meeting a person. He believes that that's something that's important. But it doesn't affect a single Christian doctrine. It doesn't mean we don't know what the words of the New Testament are. That's saying that if we don't know 1% of the words in the New Testament, then guess what? Kenneth, what's up, man? So, before we close off, we need a word from our sponsors over here at Sesame Street.
One more thing. Sesame Street was brought to you today by the letter P.
From dictionary.com, our word of the day is pseudo-intellectual. Pseudo-intellectual. First definition: a person exhibiting intellectual pretensions that have no basis in sound scholarship. It seems pretty obvious to me that Mr. Taylor is exhibiting pretensions that have no basis in sound scholarship. Dr. Bart Ehrman does not agree with the conclusions that are being attributed to him in this specific post. And I think that is something that's significant because the person sharing the meme has obviously never had to read them. He's never had to do like sit through and do any biblical studies. And I don't care if you're an atheist, you can be a Muslim and textual critic or whatever it is. People don't draw these goofy conclusions. Definition number 2. A person who pretends an interest in intellectual matters for reasons of status, which is why this gentleman says things like he refers to himself as a pastor or some learned individual. Well, it's because this is how you get people to view your page, to view your goofy videos. This is how you get people to donate to your goofy mission and ask for people to donate so you could continue spreading the message that is not actually supported by the people that you're citing. So all that is to say, you should really, really, really be aware of these pseudo-intellectuals. And I have a poll here. Bam. If you could vote on the poll. Is the defendant guilty of masquerading as an intellectual? The 2 options are yes, or also yes, but in Greek. Because the fact of the matter is that it's already been proven that Bart Ehrman does not support the conclusions being attributed to him. And so for Mr. Taylor, I told him he shares a lot of goofy nonsense, and then he pretends, and then he has a nerve to like talk smart to you. Like after, like you try to talk to him about something that you've actually studied, and then he hasn't. Like I did a live video with this guy some months back, and while I'm talking to him, I can see him Googling through the reflection in his glasses. Like you can literally see like Google pass right across the lenses of his glasses, and then he's typing in stuff that I'm saying, pop, 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 and then trying to respond that way. It's not an intellectual. This is a security guard. It's no disrespect to security guards, but it's just to say, brother, you're not even someone that's done just like the basic like readings and trying to pass this stuff off that you sincerely do not understand. So when you get an opportunity, I would love to hear your response back to my video. So before I run, any questions, class? Any questions? Matter of fact, let's bring this back in the meantime so we can. Let's see. Oh, by the way, this was brought to you by Urban Creations. So one of my very nice Facebook friends sent me this political blackout thing here for my birthday, and this puppy here changes colors and does all of this very sexy stuff. Ernest does not have one. As far as the books that are behind me right now at this moment, probably 90% of them. Most of them are references that I've had to use and for one time or another. I don't really do novels or things like that, but yes, so for the vast majority of 90% of the ones that are behind me, yes, I have a cabinet that's over there for stuff that I still need to read, and I will, I have a habit of grabbing more than I can read all at one time, and with school and this time and stuff like that. But as far as the ones behind me, these are books that I use regularly. These are like for example, these are ones that you would like, read like through, and so I've made my way through the vast majority of those. These are majority references, Greek New Testament, books on Hebrew, and so on and so forth. So, but anyway, back to Urban Creations. Yeah, so ERBEN Creations, 267-630-1166. Urban Creations. So shout out to them over there for sending me this here for my birthday, which was July 6th, and the rest of you peasants sent me nothing. But yes, so Mr. Taylor, when you get an opportunity, I am dying to hear your response to anything that was said here. I would love for you. You've claimed to have. You claim you speak to Mr. Dr. Bart Ehrman regularly, and so I'm looking forward to you asking him what that statement is supposed to mean. Be sure to note the fact that I played his videos with his direct statements on whether or not we can know these things, and then get back to me. It says, you're so smart but not smart enough to know that you're mirroring the plaque you have is backwards for the viewers. Yes, I actually am aware of that, because when I went into my LogicView thing, the streaming service that I'm using to pair my video and the other stuff up here, I actually made so that it mirrors everything I do. That way it does not show straight on. That way when I move, I'm not confused as to which way I need to move. So I actually do know that, Ernest. But you, sir, have a fat face. And you've yet to deal with the fact that you have a very, very fat face. So fat indeed that unlike me, when you look at me straight on, you can see my ears. When you look at you straight on, your chipmunk cheeks hide the fact that you have ears. And your name is Ernest, but it looks like you have no ears. And so deal with that first. Take the beam out of your eye before you come trying to take the speck out of mine. Okay? You also have a receding hairline that you do not want to discuss. So, I do not believe that there is a website. I know he has a Facebook page, and he also has a YouTube page, Beats, B-E-A-T-Z, the letter N, and then Burns, B-U-R-N-Z, Beats and Burns. But he's my Facebook friend on here. His name is Eric Benny. You'll see him comment all the time. So if you need something, he does engraving and all the sorts of things, music and stuff. So shout out to Mr. Eric Benny, and check him out on YouTube, 267-630-1166 if you need some engraving work done. So anyway, I'm done for the day. Mr. Taylor, holla at me.